Well, welcome to Graceway Baptist Church in our Sunday School Hour. This is our lesson that we're going to present on June 23rd, 2024. And we're studying, of course, the life of Abraham. We come to another incident with a familiar person, and that is Abimelech. Abimelech is part of the Philistine culture. And you know, when we get into 1st and 2nd Samuel, those areas, the Philistines were the major enemy of Israel, but not at this time. This is quite a bit before that. And we find that Abimelech, the Philistine king, actually proposes a peace treaty with, of all people, Abraham, the Jew or the Hebrew. And when we look in Genesis chapter 21, verses 22 through 24 is all we're going to cover. We think about Abimelech and we think about the deceptive encounter that Abraham had with him before. Now, question. Put yourself in Abimelech's shoes. How would you feel about doing business or making a treaty with a person who had deceived you, a person who had lied to you? And so when I read this story, that gets my attention. Abimelech has something that he wants and some type of agreement that is mutually beneficial between he and Abraham. And this has to happen for some reason, and apparently as Abimelech weighs it all out, it's worth the risk. It's worth the trouble of dealing with a person who had been deceptive with him before. Now, if you don't think that's a big issue, put yourself in his shoes and think about what you would do if this were a neighbor, or if this were a family member, or a work associate, or somebody like that, that you weren't exactly sure if you could trust them. So let's look at our introduction. After the deceptive encounter with Abimelech, Abraham was given permission to remain in the kingdom of Abimelech. Now, why is that important? Because when this happened before with Pharaoh, Pharaoh ran him out of town. Okay? Abimelech was kind enough to let him stay. Now, to keep peace, there needed to be a clear understanding about the use of the land. And you know, even in our day, so many times problems arise because we don't have a clear understanding. Let's say that if one of my kids, let's say it was Taylor, needed for some reason to come back to Oklahoma City and he needed to move into our house. And we had a spare bedroom, and that would be fine. We would be more than willing to help him. But, pardon me, where trouble comes in is when there's not a clear understanding. When are you coming? What are going to be the terms of this? How much are you going to pay, if anything? And how long are you going to stay? Swallowed wrong, sorry. Now, if you're helping somebody and it's just this open-ended thing, what happens if it's not clear? Well, when you have to tell them, I'm going to need you to move out, what is that going to do to your relationship? But if they agree, I'll come and stay for 6 weeks, then you've got a clear understanding. Now, when we look at the situation between Abraham and Abimelech, apparently up until this point there was not a clear understanding. Abimelech just wants Abraham out of his life. He doesn't want Abraham's God bothering him or threatening him with death as God did before. So he's just like, whatever, just take your wife, go on out of here and dwell wherever you want. Well, there was a problem, as it always happens. There was a problem that came up. Now, to us, living in this culture, in this country, this wouldn't be that big of a deal. But you've got to remember they are living in the desert. What is the most important commodity in a desert area? You're right, water. And this is going to end up being a treaty that has to involve water rights. And so there's a significant problem that we're going to see in here that eventually they had to work out and they had to solve. But first, however, there had to be some awkward moments. And I think today we all want to be so nice and so peaceful, and we don't want to stir up trouble, and we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And while that may on the surface sound like a pretty good thing, I think what that leads to is dishonesty, misunderstanding, and probably greater hurt feelings as a result. I think that we have to sometimes do some hard things, some awkward things, if we're ever going to clear things up. And what that's going to mean is both you and the party you're dealing with is going to have to be mature. There may be a rebuke that's involved in it. Now, if you want to know what kind of Christian you are and how mature you are as a believer, here's my question. How well can you take a rebuke? How well can you take a rebuke? If you're going to take it and it's going to end up in a big fight, it's going to end up with you being so messed up that you can't even function, if it's going to be a burden and a grudge and all of that you carry the rest of your life and maybe even carry to your grave, then I would say that's a mark of spiritual immaturity. Because we all have to be able to take what another person says and not just be offended and hurt and all messed up by it, but maybe to stop and talk about it. Maybe if we understood where they were coming from, we might be able to resolve it. Now, sometimes you can't, and sometimes they won't, no matter what you do. I've been in that situation before, and that's why the Apostle Paul said that if it's possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men, because you can't control another person. I had someone in my office one time, and all they wanted to do was talk about their spouse. And I said, well, he kind of needs to come and be here. Oh, no, he would never come. I've asked him. And sure enough, this person would not come at all. And so when I'm talking to this man's wife about the situation, she wanted me to give her the steps of action that we could take to change her husband. And I said, well, unfortunately, we don't have the privilege of changing other people. They have to want to change, and they have to be a part of the process. That's reasonable, right? In fact, I went on to say, if we could somehow change other people, we wouldn't be having this meeting right now, would we? The only person that we can really change, I said, is the one who is present, and that would be you. Now, unfortunately, she didn't want to deal with anything that she had to do or she had to change, and her husband wouldn't come in, and so it was kind of a difficult situation. You've been in those kind of situations as well, haven't you? It's difficult. Well, at least here we have a situation where two people come together and there is something awkward that they have to think about, something that they have to deal with, and both of them are mature enough to actually sit and talk about it and come to an agreement instead of just flying off of the handle and each man being in their own corner and not considering what the other person has to say. It's in these situations that I try to practice and I try to remember, not always successful, you understand that too, that we are to be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. But some people are just like a firecracker. Any bit of criticism, any bit of rebuke or anything like that at all, they just blow up. That's not the way to handle anything. So let's look at this. Genesis 21, 22 through 24. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, there's a name for you, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. Okay, well, that's a good way to start off a tough conversation, isn't it? God is with you in all that you do. Now, verse 23. Now, therefore, swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me, with my offspring, or with my posterity, but that according to the kindness that I have done to you, you will do to me and to the land in which you have dwelt. And Abraham said, I will swear. Okay, what in the world are we talking about here? We're talking about deceit. And this is Abimelech saying, we've got something that we need to talk about and something that we need to settle. What are going to be the terms of us dwelling together here? And then he has to bring up the past. You know, don't you hate it when people bring up the past? And sometimes it's easy to say, no, we're not going to talk about the past. Notice that Abraham didn't do that. In fact, it's as if Abraham is saying, without saying it, I get where you're coming from. I'm not going to refute you in any of this. I see it. I see it and I get it. Why? Because Abraham had lied. He had been deceitful with Abimelech, he and Sarah both. And so as Abimelech with his commander, I'm assuming he's brought along as a witness, so that if anybody disputes this, or if Abraham deceives him again and backs out of this treaty that they're going to make, that Phicol could, it's a terrible name, could come along and say, no, that's not the way that it happened. Now, you notice here Abraham doesn't get defensive. Abraham doesn't go back and say, well, if you're going to bring up the past, or you don't understand what was going on, or anything like that at all. He just simply says, I swear, I won't deal with you in a false manner. Now, in doing that, we see that the two men are starting to forge an agreement, something that they can work together on so that they can live in peace. So, number one, another interaction. Verse 22a. You know, when you have some kind of an altercation with another person, especially if it's your fault, sometimes you want to go to a place where you're never going to see them again, right? Sometimes you want to be where you won't run into them, you won't run into their family, and you can just kind of put it out of your mind and forget about it. That's why people, a lot of times, sadly, they change churches because they don't really want to work anything out. They just don't want to run into that person again. Some people move. They may go to a different state. They may go to a different part of the country. They may change jobs or anything like that because they don't want to have to face what the problem really is. Well, apparently Abraham does not see this as a valid way to handle the situation. Instead of saying, hey, if you're just going to bring up the past, I'm out of here, buddy. I don't want to talk to you or see you, and I'll move somewhere else. But when we look at 22 and the first part of it, that's what the A means in there. And it came to pass that at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of the army, spoke to Abraham. I wonder if whenever they came, and it sounds to me like in the text that Abimelech is approaching Abraham, not Abraham approaching Abimelech, right? And I wonder if it was awkward, first of all, for Abimelech to say, let's go, and I'm bringing you along as a witness. And I wonder if it was awkward whenever Abraham got word that Abimelech was coming. Now, I don't know if he did get word. He might have been just totally surprised. It may have been that he looks out of the tent and he sees people coming, and he's wondering maybe if it's the angel of the Lord again, but no, as it turns out, it's Abimelech. And I wonder if his stomach kind of went up in his throat. I wonder if his mouth got a little dry, and I wonder if maybe his palms got a little bit sweaty. What does he want, and what is going to happen, and what are we going to do? And I wonder if Abraham felt a little bit of shame because of the way he had treated him before. Maybe not, but it could be. You can see that situation. And so Abimelech is approaching Abraham because they have something that they need to talk about, and you could imagine what Abraham would have been thinking. So this would mean that when we talk about dwelling in the land, it's not just where you're going to pitch your tent. It's going to be where your servant's going to be, where your flock's going to graze, where your people going to draw water from, all of that kind of stuff. This is a big operation that Abraham has, and so they need to talk about the situation. Now, understand this. We don't think much about this because we don't live all that agrarian in our particular culture, but the flocks would require a significant amount of water, as well as they would need pasture in the desert. Now, green grass, as you know, doesn't just grow anywhere. It has to have water, and the sheep, when they would eat down into the pasture, they had to protect the grass because the sheep would pull it up by the roots, and then of course you don't have any pasture. So the shepherd would watch very carefully for the sheep, and when they started eating the pasture down enough that it would be damaging to the grass, meaning no more food supply for the sheep, the shepherd would take them somewhere else. And that's kind of what you find in Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And it says that He leads us to still waters, and He also makes us lie down in what kind of pastures? Green pastures. Pastures that have had a chance to rest. They've had a chance to grow out again from the last time the sheep grazed there. And perhaps the sheep had eaten down the grass in one pasture, so the shepherd says, time to go, sheep. And it's hot, and it's dry, and it's the desert, and the sheep are tired, and they're weary, and they're worn out, and they're starving before they get to the next pasture, where they can drink of the cool, clear water that doesn't frighten them because it's rushing by so fast. It's still. And still waters run deep is what they say. And so the sheep are able to drink their fill, and then they're able to go and graze off of the fresh green grass and actually lay down in it, as it says. That's the picture that we get. Well, that's how Abraham has to live. That's how Abraham's servants have to live as they take care of the sheep. That's what we might call a day in the life of a desert dweller. Now, Abimelech is concerned about all of this because for every blade of grass Abraham's sheep are eating, Abimelech's sheep don't have that. And when grass is at a premium, you really want everything you can get, and you want enough to sustain your life. Now, not only is this a problem between Abraham and Abimelech, but this is a problem back several chapters ago between even Abraham and Lot. And these are men that are friends. These are men that are related. These are men that get along with everything, and yet pasture became a problem. Can you imagine what it would be like between Abraham and Abimelech? Much more possibly contentious in that situation. So they had to work out an agreement for water and pasture rights. That's what this boils down to. And also an agreement to live in peace with each other. Now that's what Abraham and Lot and their servants couldn't do. They were fighting. There was contention between Abraham's servants and Lot's servants. Well, here the potential is much, much higher. It's really ramped up because of these two men and what they've been through before. And Abimelech in this situation kind of seems to be the bigger man, doesn't he? He's the one that approaches Abraham, and before a fight breaks out and before there's contention between Abraham's people and Abimelech's people, and by the way, it doesn't hurt when you have the general of your army right there at your side, you kind of get the idea this is more serious than just, something that would be happening in modern day life between neighbors. Hey, can I have that chainsaw back that you borrowed a year ago or something? It's much more than that type of thing. This is extremely serious, and it affects their livelihood. And it's not a matter of how much is available. There's a lot of desert, but there's very little pasture and very little water. So hopefully you get the picture. Number 2, here is another affirmation for Abraham. Now, back when Abimelech had Sarah, and God said, touch her and you die, and then he takes her back to Abraham and says, what's the deal? You told me she was your sister. And Abraham kind of, well, she kind of is my sister because we have the same father, but we have different mothers and that kind of thing. That's just trying to cover yourself on a technicality. That's kind of a lie when you think about it. And it's certainly deceptive in this situation. And so when God said to Abimelech, take her back to the man, he's a man of God, and ask him to pray for you. Now, talk about awkward. You're caught in a lie, you're in this situation, and then Abimelech goes, by the way, I've heard you're a man of God. Will you pray for me that God won't kill me? You talk about awkward, and that must have been one of the most difficult prayers Abraham had ever prayed. You're talking about praying for an enemy like Jesus told us to, but you're also talking about praying in humiliation before your enemy, because Abraham doesn't look like a man of God. And yet this next time that they meet, Abimelech looks around and he sees all the tents and he sees the servants and he sees all of the flocks and everything that is there. And he says in verse 22, the last part, the B part, saying, God is with you in all that you do. Now, how does he know that? The only way a pagan like Abimelech is going to assess that situation is by what he sees. Looks like you've got a good operation going here. Looks like your sheep had a lot of lambs and your goats had a lot of lambs. Look like you have cattle and they look fat and sassy, and it looks like everything's going well and that everything you touch is turning to gold. And the only thing that Abimelech can attest that to is to say, God is with you. God is with you. Now, when you look at that situation, was it true? Yeah, it actually was true. Abraham was blessed because God was with him. Abraham now is the father of a son named Isaac, and Isaac is the one that has been given the covenant blessing, and there's going to be a nation, the nation of the Jews, the nation of Israel, and it also is the bloodline of the Lord Jesus Christ. It is through the Jews that Jesus is going to come and be born so that he can take on flesh and dwell among us, as it says in the Gospel of John chapter 1. So this is necessary for God to do this, and Abimelech takes notice. And Abimelech, the only reasonable conclusion he can come to is this lying man of God is actually being blessed by God. I wonder if he questioned that. I wonder if he looked at that and said, wow, I didn't think he'd be doing this well after what he did to me. I wasn't sure his God could really pull it off out here in the desert. I wasn't sure how things would go. And maybe he half expected to see Abraham maybe hungry and starving, and his cattle and his sheep are just on their last leg and very thin. I mean, I really don't know, but it's not hard to get to that place, is it? And so here we are. This is Abimelech kind of saying in a roundabout way the same thing that God had said about him. Abraham is a prophet. He's a man of God. He's blessed of God, and God is with him. And let's see. There also was the visible prospering under the blessing that is coming on. It reminds me of Deuteronomy chapter 8, 18 and 19. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth, that He may confirm His covenant that He swore with your fathers, as it is this day. And if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. Now, that of course is written when they are going in after slavery to the promised land. That wasn't expressly written or given to Abraham, and yet the principle is still true, and it's still true today. If you've got any food, if you've got water, if you've got clothing, if you've got housing, if you've got money in the bank, whatever the amount may be, just understand that comes from God. And understand that any blessing in your life and any measure of health that you have, that is a gift from God. Much less in Abraham's case, where God says, I'm going to make you a nation, I'm going to make you extremely prosperous, able to defend the baby, able to raise him up right and make sure that he doesn't ever starve to death or anything like that, to make sure that you have enough servants and people and weaponry so that an invading army can't come in and kidnap the boy or anything like that. I mean, this is big time stuff. And so God really does bless Abraham for the protection of the covenant and as a testimony as he is there. So that brings us to number 3. Here's also another painful reminder. A good word and then a bad word. Something that is pleasant to hear. Yeah, God is with me. You are right about that, man. That's wonderful. And then all of a sudden, here comes the painful word. And we can learn a little bit of a lesson here that whenever you have to have a conversation with somebody that is going to be contentious with them, show them your love and show them your kindness first. Don't just dive in, because everything and everyone, they're not all bad and completely and totally wrong. There's two sides to every coin, as we say. And so Abimelech is very smart and very shrewd as he comes to Abraham. Boy, the Lord is certainly with you. And Abraham would be agreeable. There's a bridge there. And then Abimelech says, but there's also something I need to say to you, a painful reminder of a past sin. You just can't run from it, can you? Verse 23 says, now therefore swear to me by God, this God who has prospered you, that you serve, the God that spoke to me and the God that threatened me. I will come over to your side, that you will not deal falsely with me, with my offspring or my posterity. So Abimelech is saying, Abraham, you've been blessed by God. Can I count on you for honesty? Can I count on you for truthfulness? Now that is a terrible thing to ever say to somebody who is a Christian. You ever said to anybody, now I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to be honest with me. Now what are you really implying about that? That they wouldn't be honest with you and that they might not tell you the truth? That, when you think about it, is kind of a backward compliment, isn't it? Be honest with me. Well, what do you think I would do? You think I would lie to you? That's what is happening here. And so the two things Abimelech knew, God was with Abraham, and Abraham was not altogether trustworthy. And Abraham's previous deception may have been the reason that Abimelech even wanted the treaty. It may be that he says to his general, we've got to go and we've got to get something settled because this guy will trick you in a minute. This guy will play word games with you in a minute, in a heartbeat. We've got to get something really nailed down. So it might be not only that Abimelech kind of rebukes him by saying, deal with me honestly, but it may be even that Abimelech, by seeing the need for the peace treaty, is actually saying, Abraham, if we don't get this nailed down and get it in print and the fine print, everything settled, I don't trust you, other words. Now that's a terrible thing to say about a person who is a man of God. So that's where they find themselves. So what do you suppose Sarah thought about seeing Abimelech? Can you imagine? Here he comes up and then she looks at him, and I don't know what that would be, but that must have added to the awkwardness of the situation. Maybe when Abraham went out of the tent door and he goes, hey Sarah, somebody's coming. Maybe she came out and joined him. Maybe her eyes were a little better than his, and maybe she was the first one to see his face, that man that had taken her into his harem. Interesting to think about, isn't it? So awkwardness in this whole situation. So we come to point number 4, and there's another request. But that according to the kindness that I have done to you, you will do to me and to the land in which you have dwelt. And Abraham said, I will swear. Now, what he is basically saying, Abimelech is going, you remember that time with Sarah when you lied to me? I want you to be honest from now on. And do you remember everything that I gave you when we left? And also, do you remember that I didn't run you out of Dodge? I let you stay wherever you wanted to be. And basically, what Abimelech is saying as he brings that up is, you owe me. You owe me. Now that's a tough situation for a person to be in. Listen to me, and I'm approaching you, and after all, you owe me a favor, because Abimelech could have done what Pharaoh did back in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 17. You can look that up if you don't remember it. And 17 and 18, I guess, and kind of read the story there and take a look at it. Abimelech didn't do that. And Abraham agreed to the terms of the peace treaty because of the kindness of Abimelech, but it's kind of out of obligation. You owe me. And Abraham says, I acknowledge that. And out of gratitude, maybe Abraham would say, I swear I'll do that because you've been so kind to me. But at any rate, the person who is not of God seems to be more generous and thoughtful and more honest than even Abraham, so they need to get this cleared up. And there's more to the story that we'll look at next week. So our conclusion, think about this. God's people should seek to be good neighbors. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. We ought to be like the Good Samaritan, and we should understand that the Good Samaritan really is a picture of God and His care for us who have been so beaten up and wounded by sin. That's the real point of the story. Secondly, in conclusion, when tempted to sin, God's people should remember that we have an accuser. And here's Abimelech, he's bringing it all up. And the Bible says that the devil stands night and day before the throne of God, bringing up our sin. This is not just between us and God. It's between the people that we participated in sin with. It's against the other people that we deceived other people with. And it also is against the devil, who is the one who tells us when he tempts us, it'll be okay, no one will ever know. And then as soon as we do it, he goes, now everybody's going to know. And we are threatened with exposure, and we will live our lives scared to death about all of it. Better just to avoid that whole thing and yield not to temptation, as the old hymn says. Number 3, God forgives our sins and remembers them no more, but people do not. One sinful encounter challenges, damages our credibility and our witness. And we may like to forget about it and put it away and say the past is the past, but people don't always do that, do they? They may choose not to bring it up, but they rarely forget. And number 4, we should extend kindness and remember the kindness of others. In other words, not taking it for granted. It's the expression of Romans 12:18. We mentioned this before. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, not them, on you, live peaceably with all men. And in Luke 6:31, it says, and just as you want men to do to you, you also do for them likewise. Now, wouldn't those two verses, wouldn't they solve an awful lot of problems in church, in the home, in business? It's so simple. It's so easy, and yet it is so incredibly hard. And notice here that the verses we read, they don't say, if the other person does right, then you do right. It doesn't say that, does it? This is on you, Christian. And it doesn't say, if they will agree to live peaceably, then you work it out. No, it as much as depends upon you. So may we learn from this situation that Abraham kind of got himself into an awkward pickle because of his sin and because of his lie. And so many times we do the same thing. May God help us not to get in that situation anymore, because we really do want to live at peace. And we want it to be an honest peace. We want it to be honorable. We want it to be sincere. And we don't want to have our lost friends, family members, and neighbors saying, Please don't lie to me about this. We don't want that to be our reputation. We serve a God of truth, and we are to speak the truth at all times. But we're to do it in love. Don't forget that, okay? So, with that being said, may the Lord bless you. Thank you for tuning in and watching this today. I really do appreciate it. And teachers, may the Lord bless you as you teach your class. We'll see you next week. Thank you.